Welcome. All right, we're on. It is 1 o'clock and I'm excited to have you all on. We are going to be recording. I should be unmuted. That's great. We should be recording now, and we'll be playing this back for future attendees who couldn't make it but did register. Now, I'm keen to connect with you. I'm a consultant in the culture and leadership space for Sentify. Now, I'm pretty experienced with online facilitation and coaching, but this is my first webinar, and I'm pretty excited by it. And I know if you're like most of my clients, you're pretty busy, and you need this time to be useful. You need to get at least one useful thing out of today and the time that we've got together. Something that can make you think, something that can help you get more out of your busy life. Now, I respect that, and I hope that you'll find our time together engaging, informative, educational, hopefully a little entertaining too. So I'm presenting from Canberra, Australia. I haven't spent my whole life here. The accent tends to give it away. And the photo above is from my hometown on the St. Croix River in Wisconsin. Northern edge of dairy country, southern edge of timber country. It's a place that's, it's lush with forests and rivers and farms. Now, I'm going to stop screen sharing here for a second so I can talk with you. There we go. What I'd like to do is say a little thing. There's something that's taking place here in Australia, takes place here in Australia that I'm really passionate about. And I'm actually think it's an important piece. It's something that I think is more important than me to just read a card at you. It's something around giving acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land. So where I grew up, it was the Chippewa people, but here in Canberra, I'm on Ngunnawal country. And it's nice to just stop at the start of these things and to give in, let me see here, give in a little recognition, acknowledgement to the traditional owners. So what I'd like you to do is take a moment, go into the chat bar and enter in where you're coming from. Tell me a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what your interest is. So I'll give it a start there. I'm James from Canberra in the leadership development industry. There we go. I'd like to see a little bit in. I see that we've got someone in from Braidwood. That's great. Ngunnawal country, Matt, great. Communications and consulting. Ewan country, great. Wow. Townsville, Canberra, Victoria, Kiala, resource management. Wow, there's quite a few. We've got, a number of different folks. Wiradjuri, Melbourne, Canberra, excellent. One of the things I'd like to do is these recognitions and the acknowledgements of the country that you're meeting on, that you're in today, keep coming in. Wow, it's quite a space, Sydney. We're reaching out to a lot of people. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for coming here and sharing time with me. There's a few other people I want to acknowledge and share time, or acknowledge that they've given me. I'm going to share this PowerPoint here. I'd like to share some of the people that gave me the experiences that helped develop some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you today. The folks from the not-for-profit industries that I worked back in the States as well as here in Australia. Folks from the state and territory level governments that really gave me a passion for, civil service and public service. All the people in the public sector, primarily here in Australia, in the Australian public service, and all the agencies that I've worked with, both in the leadership development space, the learning design, and the executive coaching. But finally, I'd like to thank, Chris and the folks at Sentify who are giving me the opportunity to present this to you today. We're going to be going through, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to be going through a lot of things, well, 4 things really, that are going to cover some of the key points of things that I've learned from the senior executives that I've been coaching for the last few years. And one of the things, if I've learned anything about coaching and collaboration, facilitating, is that in leading in times of change, it's like It's like being in a crucible. To succeed, you need to have the skills to manage that heat. It's the heat of difficult conversations, of unrealistic deadlines, of stakeholders or approvers or employees or colleagues who don't agree with your ideas, and at times can place unrealistic demands on a delivery at all cost. The people that I work with, be it designing the tailored learning facilitation, interventions, coaching for themselves or their teams, they're facing challenges that are very real. So what I do is I help them to be their best selves, to enable to face these challenges. So this webinar is going to give you a little taster of what we could do together to help you get the most out of this. I need to ask you to stretch. And what I mean by this, I'm going to share my screen because I'd like you to look at a little diagram here. And that diagram is this. This person in the middle, that little stick figure, if you can imagine yourself being that person, that's your comfort zone, right? That's where you succeed 100% of the time to maybe 85% of the time. Beyond that, that lies your stretch zone. That might take you out to about 50% of the time. And after that, well, there lie dragons and scary things. And out there, you don't learn because you don't succeed enough to embed the lessons of failure. And the rub of it is inside the comfort zone, you don't learn either because there's not enough failure to catalyze those lessons. You only learn in that stretch zone. But the trick of it is the closer you get to the edge, well, the more uncomfortable it becomes. So what I'd like you to do as a first activity, I'd like you to start thinking that the more that you engage with this today, the more you'll get out of it. So to start that activity, I want you to think of a workplace challenge that you've got, something that's, a hurdle that you need to get over, something that's got a little bit of heat in it. And I'd like it to see it in the chat bar there. Can you put some of your hurdles, the things that you're facing, in the chat bar? And I'll give you a little example. So I'm building and connecting with clients. Great. Workshop presentation, underperforming subcontractor on a high stakes project, job interviews. Yeah, system connections, not enough hours in the week. Isn't that the truth? Getting staff to work together, public speaking. Yeah, adjusting to managing staff, riding those peaks and troughs of work while maintaining the health and well-being. Oh, there's some really good challenges in there. Mandatory vaccination, compliance, finalizing partnership agreements, acting in a new position, low motivation of staff. Look, all of these things are things that have different components to them. And when I'm designing a learning intervention or if I'm working with a client, there's a number of different ways that we can look at that. And these are really interesting challenges. But I'd like to explore some of the ideas in these challenges and give you 4 things for you to use as you address these challenges. And perhaps they'll bring out the best in yourself. So specifically, what I'm liking to do, I'm going to share screen here and show you. There we go. We're going to look at the following things. First, there's going to be an easy formula for performance development. And we'll explore that and what it means and how you can implement that in your own workplace. Then we're going to look at how you can unlock the power of language, which can open your perspectives, give you access to a larger data set that can help you to do the things that you do best. We're going to manage some of those unconscious drivers of change resistance and see how you can unlock and analyze change projects to bring out the best. And finally, we're going to create a space for discretionary effort to emerge. That's that extra effort that is above and beyond, the stuff that helps bring something that's good all the way up to great. Let's first start looking at that easy formula for performance development. Now notice we're talking about performance rather than productivity, because it's much more about how we do things rather than the quantifiable. Potential, well, that's what's possible for you and your team. And interference, that's either external or internal, right? External could be the lacking information that you need or lacking the resources or difficult stakeholders, external sources of interference, or it could be internal sources of interference, negative self-talk, fear, not connecting with what's already inside of you. For example, you might be running a change process and you feel that you're not tracking how you want to. You might know that your team's up for the challenge. You might know that they've got heaps of potential, but for some reason they're just not hitting the mark. So looking at what could be causing this, you find that there's some real anxiety within the team, and that any efforts that they're making, they just seem to be disconnected. And you may also find that you're feeling a little bit of doubt about your own ability to make the changes that need to happen. Now, that's a pretty realistic experience, and they're not uncommon sources of change failure. Just a few of the ones that I've found to help my clients work through. And as I'm looking through the list here of the challenges you've put in, I'd like you to remember those because we'll come back to those. Think of those challenges. Think about what is it that's between you and your potential and your performance. That's say what's interfering here. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to launch a little poll, and I'd like you to just, there we go. We're going to launch an easy formula for performance. On your screen, you should have a poll arising, and just tap. Is it an internal, external? What's taking place that's keeping you from reaching that performance potential? Difficult circumstances, people. Some folks feel they don't have the skills yet, or they don't have the belief yet, or there's other sources of internal or external. All right, we're about halfway through registering. 60% of folks have answered the poll. That's great. And so far, there's a lot of internal. Don't have the belief yet. Okay. Give it just another few seconds, and then we'll end the poll. And I think I'll present it to you so you can see the results. We've got, so far, 36% saying it's difficult people, tied with difficult circumstance. End poll, here we go. All right, share results, give you a chance to look at that. So difficult circumstance, difficult people, 35%. I don't have that belief yet, self-belief, 31%. And that's one of the key factors that we're going to be looking at to unlock potential and performance. Don't have the skills yet, 25%. And then there's some other, either internal or external. Now, if you think about that, think about these things, wouldn't it be great if you could unlock the tools inside of you to be able to address these? Yeah. Well, one of the things we're going to look at around homework for the next week or so, when you're faced with a difficulty, the task for you is to write down what you think the interference is. And while the external sources are sometimes easier to identify, I'm going to stop sharing that so it's off the screen. The external sources are sometimes easier to identify. The internal sources are pretty important, right? So the extra credit, the real source of change, will be to identify those sources that are the internals, elements like doubt, fear, even some of those habits that you don't like to admit, like defensiveness or bias. If you do this, you'll be well on your way to building your ability to engage with our first micro skill. And that's performance equals potential minus interference. Regardless if your interference is internal or external, one of the things we want to look at is how to give you a sense of personal agency, a sense of your own capability in addressing this. And this is underpinned by the second of our 4 micro skills. And that's the habits of language. Let's look at that. How do we use language? When I design learning interventions, I tend to break them up into 3 different ways. They can be informative. Webinars are largely informative. There's information, new information. They can be skills development, right? That's more than just a one way, it's a 2-way. It's practicing some of the hard skills. The homework that I've put into this is one way to make skills development happen. And finally, there's the last piece, the identity work piece. And that's the real stuff. That's the hard stuff. That's where the real fire and heat is. It involves learning, sometimes unlearning, and entering into that stretch zone. Well, today's session, it's due to the nature of the webinars, they're largely the informative style. But my goal is to make it, as I said at the beginning, engaging, informative, educational, hopefully a little bit entertaining. So our second micro session is largely in the identity piece. It's the piece around language. It's to help you gain a greater access to that larger data set. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm going to share screen once more, and I'd like you to look at the power of language. The power of language, right? We're going to look at a set of words that sounds the same, but they actually mean some markedly different things. We're going to look at the word react. Reaction is a situation plus a catalyst, and then there's an automatic reaction. There's no choice in the matter. It's like back in high school chemistry. I don't know if it's the same here in Australia as it was when I grew up. We actually made explosions, controlled explosions in a lab. And you'd add a little bit of catalyst to, and it would have no choice. It would just occur, right? In a work context, think if you're sitting at your desk and a brief that comes across your desk, it's poorly written. It doesn't have the key elements that you've told people you need to have in that brief. You might find, if you're reactive, a rising of angry or some sort of anger, right? Frustration, disappointment. If you're reactive, you might start to feel your jaw clench or your fists pump or your headache return. If you're active, you might even raise your voice at the person who neglected to put into that brief what you've asked them to do. But it's not the only way, right? Look at that word react versus the word respond. Instead of being reactive, you could be responsive. Responsiveness sounds similar, right? It's the situation, there's the catalyst, but then there's a moment where you have thought, you have choice, and then you can choose what response to do. When the brief of the report comes across the table, you can still notice anger arising. You can still notice the headache returning, but after that, you have a choice. You don't have to raise your voice at the person. You got a moment to choose what's the most effective course of action before you blindly react. Now, if you think this isn't possible, I'd ask you to remember, Viktor Frankl, right? I'm a bit of a bibliophile. I've got a library in the house, and Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, he said that between stimulus and response, there's a pause. And in that pause, there's the opportunity to make a different choice. Sometimes it's just the one moment that can save you doing something that you'd regret. Haven't you ever said something and after seeing the response on the other person's face immediately regretted saying that? Or have you typed out an email in anger and hit send and then realized, oh, I shouldn't have sent that email? Sometimes it's just the moment. That's all that's required. Yeah. So before we get to the homework for this second micro skill of unlocking language, I want you to think for a second. Think of engagement. Now, do you have the ability to enhance your levels of engagement in our time together? And if you do have that ability to manage your own levels of engagement, would that ability have any impact on what you're able to get out of the hour? How about if you have that ability, would it enable you to be more committed to doing the pieces of homework? Because there's a difference between going to be taught and arriving to learn. It's what Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset. And there's quantifiable evidence that support that. Think about the words, I have to, versus the words, I get to. Yeah. One is limiting, it's demanding, and the other is full of possibility and curiosity. Your homework when looking at the power of language is to get that pause whenever you experience or sense a difficulty for the next week and look to the internal sources of interference, specifically around the language. your story, how you choose to describe what's occurring to you, right? Is it that difficult conversation going to be painful? Or is it going to be challenging? Because they have different connotations and different physical reactions and responsiveness that can come from painful versus challenging. And you can see that shift in your reactions and responses that occurs with that choice of words, how you describe what it is that you experience. I always tell the coaching clients that I have that the words you choose to describe yourself to yourself, those are the words that matter, because they're the words that create your reality. They're the words that manifest in how you see and interact with your world. Now, it takes a little concentration and it takes a little energy. But the big question is, how much energy are you willing to invest to get the insights that you need to help you move forward, to help you move into growth, to enhance your effectiveness? Let's look at this. Okay. Because we're now on our third micro skill. And this micro skill is the drivers of change. If we look at change, we know that there are a number of different ways to process it. But if you're looking at successful change, sustainable change, then there are a number of things that can help. One of the models that I've used in the past and found really resonates with many folks across the public service is this one around the stairway of successful innovation. It's by Grant Leichman. And what he says is that all 8 of these things are needed for successfully empowering a group to change. There's strategy, there's shared vision, communication, governance, leadership, resources, incentives, and skills. And if you have all of those 8 things, then you'll see sustainable change. But what makes this useful is if you're missing things, there are identifiable things that arise, identifiable maladaptive behaviors that arise, right? So if you're missing strategy, the change process will have a number of false starts, right? If you're missing a shared vision, you may see some sabotage arise within the troops that are trying to change. If you're missing communication, there's a sense of disconnection. If you're missing governance structures and an appropriate attention on governance, we could see elements of corruption, corner cutting. If you're missing leadership, you can see confusion. If you're missing the resources, you'll see frustration. People saying, yeah, we'd love to do this. We have the skills, incentives, governance, communication, shared vision, strategy, but where are the resources to get it done? That's frustrating. If you're missing the incentives, you'll find resistance. And if you're missing the skills, there'll be an anxiety arising. Now, does this sound familiar? Is this something that you can relate to? When you think back of the issue that you started this session with, right? That hurdle that you had to come over. What I'd like you to do now is to think about those things, and we're going to run a different poll. This time, we're going to run a poll on the drivers of change. Where have you encountered these missing pieces? All right, I'm going to launch the poll. In change that you've been part of, have you seen any of these things, strategy, shared vision, communication, governance, leadership, resources, incentives, or skills missing from the drive to make successful change? And where have they been? All right. Ooh, and I see in the chat bar, there's some interesting book references too. I'm gonna have to take a look at those afterwards. I'm a big book fan, big book fan. Strategy, shared vision seems to be coming out in the lead here, 55%, and leadership fast approaching with 44%. We're still getting some attendees to register in there on their poll. 69% of folks, 71, 74. I think I'll stop it fairly soon. Just a few more moments. Matt, thank you. A shameless plug. Did a TEDx on how interference affects our ability to communicate. Isn't that the truth? So much can help. For me, you can even see it in this. There's a little bit of anxiety. I want to really give you something good. And I start stumbling across the words when I think on that instead of what it is that I'm wanting to do. Let's end the poll here, 80%. Okay, so, and we'll share the results. We had in the lead, shared vision, a lack of shared vision, followed by a lack of leadership. Yeah, looks like resources, communication, strategy and skills, and then incentives. When you're missing these elements of change initiatives, you can use the drivers of change, that stairway of change. I'm going to share the screen once more on that so you can see it. You can use this two ways. You can say, look, I'm getting a lot of resistance with this change initiative. I wonder what it is that we're not doing right. You can go back and say, it's incentives. Something there is missing. Or you can look at it in another way. You can say, there's a lot of confusion going on. What is it that we're missing? We're missing that open leadership. It's an interesting tool to use retrospectively as well as forwardly in how you plan out change. Okay. So now we've talked about 3 micro skills thus far, right? There's the easy formula for performance. There's the power of language for unlocking that performance. And then there's the drivers of change. That was our 3rd skill. And I'd like you to think about that drivers of change because we're going to look at some homework for that micro skill. Now you can send me an email at james.samana@sentify.co, and I'll send you a copy of the image. And the homework, though, is to clear an hour in your diary. Clear an hour sometime this coming week. Grab a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of red if that's what helps you relax, and think about the change initiative that you're working with. See if you can see any of those maladaptive behaviors in the right arising within the change initiative. Look to see what's missing. And the challenge is to write down at least one thing that you could do, that you could put into place to overcome those hurdles before you. We talk about the power of language. Well, I like to think of things as hurdles as opposed to obstacles, because obstacles, they prevent you from getting what you want, but hurdles are things that you get over. Again, it unlocks that curiosity, that possibility. Now, to help you with this, it takes some self-reflection. And that's what leads us to this 4th micro skill that we're going to look at today. And that is the micro skill of awareness and discretionary effort. Now, discretionary effort is a cool concept, right? Anyone who knows things around managing and leading teams, discretionary effort is that extra effort that people will give you willingly that they don't have to, right? It's like discretionary money. I keep some discretionary money every week. I usually spend it on coffee, going out for coffee, right? It's not that bad of a habit, I guess, but still, $4 a day for a cup of Joe. It's discretionary money, unaccounted for. Discretionary effort is similar. It's the effort that an employee can give you. They'll be thinking about things when they go home. They'll be working on the weekend on an idea that'll make the work better. It might even be that they'll be reaching out and connecting with other members of the team and bringing up the culture and the camaraderie. That's discretionary. It's not needed, it's not required, it's not mandated, but boy, it makes a difference. Now, one of the cool pieces of research has been on self-other perception. And what the research shows is that if I'm, let's say, a performance 1 out of 10, I'm actually performing at a 6, but I think I'm a 9. The people that I lead will have lower levels of discretionary effort and lower levels of engagement. If I'm a 6, and I know I'm a 6, the people that I lead they'll have higher levels of discretionary effort and engagement. And this is the most fascinating piece I've found, that if I am a 6, but I actually think I'm a 5, the people that I lead will have the highest levels of discretionary effort and engagement. It's almost a evidence-based testament to the power of servant leadership, to the power of humility, right? So that takes awareness. But one of the things to remember is that awareness, it's not a giver of solace. It's a disturber. It's an awakener. Able leaders are usually sharply awake and reasonably disturbed. They're not seekers after solace. They've got their own inner serenity, right? As an avid reader, it actually comes from a book here. I'm going to stop the share. That comes from a book here behind me. It's Servant Leadership, right? A journey into the nature of legitimate power and greatness. And what Greenleaf says is that the cultivation of awareness, it gives you the basis for detachment. It gives you the ability to stand aside and to see you and yourself in the perspective of context of your own experience. And amid the ever-present dangers, threats, and alarms, but you can see your own particular assortment of obligations and responsibilities in a way that allows you to sort out the urgent from the important, and perhaps deal with the important. These are really important concepts, right? And they can help you to unlock discretionary effort within your team. Your homework for that final micro skill is to take a moment and reflect. If your intention was to stay with me for almost an hour, right? 30 some minutes so far. If your intention to stay with me for that hour was to get at least one useful thing that could help you in your work, the question is, did you find something interesting? Did that happen? Can you take a moment, pen and paper, write it down, a useful idea that you'd like to explore further? Could be that you're going to ask feedback from your direct reports on what they think is interfering with the team's performance. Maybe it's that you want to set time aside in your diary already, block it out to do the homework, right? And the opportunity that you've got to participate in this webinar. Whatever it is that was useful, I'd like you to write it down, because there's another piece of research that shows that the act of writing something down helps embed it in your long-term memory, not your short-term, but your long-term memory. And I want you to be able to take something away, something useful. Because what you've seen today is just some, right? 4 little micro skills. And each one you could spend a full day on, about how we could go into those and explore them further, apply them in different learning interventions, different culture interventions, things that can help you or your team succeed. So when I collaborate with clients to build those interventions or create positive cultures or explore deep insights for leadership and coaching conversations, it takes a little investment of time. And you've given that to me for this past bit, right? And it's been appreciated. Now, if you want to invest more in your growth and you like what you saw, maybe you can find more ways to put micro skills sessions into practice. And there'll be some things that you can do, right? You can follow me on LinkedIn, and I advertise future webinars there and make posts. You can email me again at james.samana@sentify.co, and we can set up a time to talk about what your unique challenges are and how we can work together to address these for you. I'd love to connect. I'd love to see how we can make positive change together. Now, I promised you a short, hopefully useful session that is engaging and maybe a little bit entertaining, but I'd like you to take time now for any questions, any thoughts or things that arose. What's one thing first that you got out of the session that you might think about later? So let's put that into the chat bar first. Something that you might take away and think of. So someone started, diversity makes communicating a shared vision more challenging. It does indeed. It does indeed. And it's how we work then with diversity. and inclusion, which I think go hand in hand. Stairway for Successful Innovation. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, that's a really useful tool, and it can be used to help you diagnose as well as implement and plan for change. That drivers of successful change. Yeah, the table. Shared vision is a common shortcoming. How can I create a shared vision in my context? There's a number of different things. If we're looking at collaboration, that's one of the areas I'm passionate about and fascinated by. One of the books I got, a fellow I'm linked in with, Adam Kahane, wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy: How to Work with People You Don't Agree With or Like or Trust. A fascinating piece of research in there. And he talks about when you go into a collaborative environment, right? You don't go to defend your position, you go to connect. And a lot of these micro skills will enable you to do so. We think of sometimes the hard skills, but when you think of when organizations have fallen down, it's not been because of lack of policy knowledge or technical prowess. Usually it's because someone's ego arose and prevented them from truly listening or collaborating. There's some stuff here. Events plus responses equals outcomes. Positive, negative outcomes usually depend on how we choose to respond to events in our lives. I like that, Edwin. Yes, our choice of response first, even before that, you need to know that you can choose. You need to be responsive versus reactive. That's a great one. Hurdles rather than obstacles. I like that. Driver of change. Be useful, helpful for major projects. Yeah. What was the book on servant leadership? The book on servant leadership is A Journey into the Nature and Legitimate Power of Greatness by Robert Greenleaf. It's a really good book. And he's, you know, I tend to write and underline and highlight pieces in my books that I find really important. It's a way for me to connect with the author, even if they're long gone. But this is a really good book. Paying attention to your reactions and turning them into responses. That's a really important one. Collaborating with the enemy. Yes. Can we see the Awaken quote, Reason Solace again? Sure. That is, awareness is not a giver of solace. Let me share that screen now. It is a disturber and an awakener. Able leaders are usually sharply awakened, reasonably disturbed. They're not seekers after solace, but they have their own inner serenity. Awareness is not a giver of solace. It's a disturber and awakener. Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop that screen share and go back to the chat bar here. With discretionary effort and how the leader sees themselves, are you talking about humility and modesty? Yeah, but not just humility and modesty. That area of research is called self-other appraisal. And you can look into that. You can even Google Scholar that, and it'll come up with some really fascinating research. But it's a testament to that humility in leading. You know, we don't use our positional authority. That's the authority that, you know, I'm a father. I don't know if there's any other parents out there, but it's when you say, because I'm the dad, that's why. That's positional authority. We want to use that sparingly as leaders. We want to use the power of genuine authority, of servant leadership, because people want to go with us on the journey. Good book, thanks. All right, the awareness matrix is fascinating. Yeah. Thanks, Kath. Yes, they're looking at the way we use that chat and the acknowledgement of traditional owners. It's an important piece. And I haven't seen it done back home. I haven't seen the Chippewa or the Potawatomi or the Cheyenne ever acknowledged, but it's a cultural practice we do in Australia. And I think it's an important piece of connection, of acknowledgement. Look, we are fast approaching the end of our 45 minutes. I'm at 1:40 now on the clock. I want to thank you very much for spending time with me. Hopefully you got a little bit out of that time spent with me, and hopefully you're interested in connecting, seeing how we can work together. Again, this was my first webinar. I've done lots of facilitation online and lots of coaching online, as well as in integrated settings, blended workforces where there's people in the room and people on the screen. It's an exciting time to be someone who's serving others through facilitation and through coaching. And I hope that we can connect and hook up, and hopefully I can help serve you through some of the skills that I've gained and pieces of knowledge that I have, and hopefully we can unlock the best in your performance and the performance of your team. I want to thank you all. And I'll stay on the line for a little bit more that comes up in the chat bar, but really appreciate your time today. So thanks, everyone.